Okay. Good morning, everybody. I'm Carol Weinshell, Vice President of Program and Membership at Congregation Rodeph Sholom in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Our virtual coffees, otherwise known as Coffee and Conversation, have been many and varied. We have heard from a lot of people, different topics. We've laughed, we've cried, we've learned, always learn. That's what happens when you're a teacher at heart. And so this morning is no different. This morning, we're going to commemorate Yom Hashoah. We all have, I hope, our yellow candles that we got from the men's club. I hope you can see mine. Not really, but you know, I'm holding something in my hand. There it is, which we can light tonight, thanks to the men's club's generosity. And today, we have the distinct honor and privilege to hear from Agnes Vertes. Now, for those of you who don't know Agnes, I had never met her except by phone. I met her about 10 minutes ago, and she is a friend of our own Edith Winnick. Curiously, as she was talking to me, I said to her, and this is literally 10 minutes ago, "You sound like my friend Mila." And she said, "Mila? Which Mila?" And I said, "Mila Nishbal." And sadly, I had the sad opportunity to tell her of Mila's passing. So she and Mila were very good friends as well. It's a small Jewish world, as you all know. I'm going to turn over the Zoom to Agnes, but as we always do, I'm going to ask you to please mute yourselves so that we don't have any background interference. If you have a problem doing that, I will mute you. That's the one advantage of being a host. And then there will be time for questions. Agnes promises me that she will do that. So without further ado, I think Agnes's story will be one that you will find fascinating, interesting, and I suspect there will be some tears during her presentation. So Agnes, the floor is yours, and I'm going to put you on speaker view. So wait, I thought I was putting you on speaker view. I guess that failed. Okay, I'm going to just give you the floor. Okay, Agnes, it's all yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol, for your introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. And good morning, everybody. And some of you are such early risers that this is not even the first session that you're attending. I can't say that I'm an early riser, but I am anxious to talk to you because tomorrow, that is the 8th, is Yom Hashoah. And Yom Hashoah is a very, very important day for me because I come from Budapest, Hungary, and we had a really, really large family. And I can tell you that before the Holocaust, my family numbered 270 people. That's because everybody had 8 or 9 children, and the 270 only counts first cousins, not second cousins. But after the Holocaust, we were just 70. And usually I show a picture of a wedding that took part in my family outside of Budapest in the 1930s. And I usually show that because it illustrates the devastation that happened there. Now, I was born Agnes Margaret Katz. Katz is a very Jewish name, of course. It comes from Cohen Tzaddik. My father was a Cohen, And unfortunately, I'm just a Cohen's daughter, so I don't have all the Cohen privileges. But anyway, I was born into a very, very wealthy, modern Orthodox family. Modern Orthodox means that my father followed the religion to the letter of the law, but he was a modern man. He would travel to Italy, to England, to all sorts of places. He would go to get material in Scotland, and he would go play tennis, go to the opera. So in other words, he was not a Hasid, as we call them here, and we call them Haradim in Israel. Now, I had, in addition to me, I had a little sister who was 2 years younger than I. And I am going to go into the story right away because we don't have that much time, and I want to be able to answer questions to you. I had a great grandmother whom we went to visit in 1943, I believe. Of course, I don't remember the visit itself, but I know we went there, and she was 90 years old in 1944. And the reason I mention her is because I had a more recent experience that brought up her life to me. Now, I was living a charmed life. There was nothing wrong. My mother had servants, and I had a nanny, and we lived in the part of Budapest where lots of Jews lived, but it wasn't a Jewish section per se. And we were just one block away from the very beautiful and famous street, very wide and full of trees. And that's where the nanny took me all the time to walk. And there was a very beautiful chocolate store. I've never seen one like that ever since that place. And I always went in there and always just pointed at what I wanted. And Mrs. Stiglitz, I still remember their names. They adored me and they gave me whatever I wanted. And then my father every week or every other week went in to pay my account. I was just 3 years old at the time, but I had an account there. And so life was okay. Then what happened was that Budapest had the largest industrial complex in that area in Central Europe. And of course, the Allies knew that, and they were bombing the city constantly. The British bombed in the morning, the Americans in the afternoon. So it wasn't really safe in the city. And of course, in the 1940s, they didn't have the smart bombs that you could just say, okay, you just go to the factory. So we spent a lot of time downstairs in the shelter. And my parents thought that it would be better if mom would take my sister and myself down to relatives in a smaller town. The relatives had vineyards, and it was a small village. And I don't think any of you would know the name. It was called Kishkörös. And so we went there and were there for a while. And of course, the bombs didn't go there because there was no industry there. And the relatives, the Schwartzes, of course, were very nice people, and it was an okay time. Then, March 19th, 1944, was a date that anyone who was alive at that time will remember. It's like we remember 9/11 all the time. Well, the Hungarians, Jews and non-Jews, all remember March 19th, 1944, because that was the day that the Germans occupied Hungary. See, just remember that's a very, very late date because the Hungarians were allies of the Germans. So Hungary was an independent government, and they did not allow the Germans to come in and um, take away Jews, deport the Jews. And however, the man from the age of 16, to, it must have been to 60, because they took my grandpa as well. And so they were taken to slave labor camps where they were building all sorts of things. And also they went, they didn't get uniforms, and they didn't get weapons. And they were taken, some of them were taken to the front in Ukraine or Russia, and they used them for, if the commanding officer thought that there were mines where they had to pass, they just sent the Jews ahead, and if a few of the Jews blew up, well, all the better, they thought. And that's how probably my father-in-law must have been murdered. I never met him because he was already gone in 1943. And anyway, some people from Poland and from the now I guess it's Slovakia, from Slovakia came, and my father was involved in helping the refugees Jews who made it across to Hungary. And those people told my father that the first who went into the gas chambers were mothers with little children. So my father acted on that by going to City Hall, and he was very well connected, and he got us false papers on the regular forms that they give you when you're born, so birth certificate. So my birth certificate said, excuse me, instead of Agnes Katz, I was Agnes Kovacs, and my religion, instead of Israelite, became how would I translate it? Protestant, I guess. And that was it. It was just changed. And they decided to give us away. Now, at this point, we still lived in our own house. And one day, a woman came and picked up my sister and took her away. And of course, I was not quite 4 years old, and I didn't ask any questions, where is my sister going? And I didn't think about it. And then about 2 weeks later, the lady whose name I still remember, his name was Mrs. Konus, and she said she was going to take me, and she said to me, don't you dare cry or yell. And she told my mother, please don't follow us and don't cry, because no one should know what's going on here, because they might inform the authorities that something is going on here. So she picked me up, and because, I was still a little more than a toddler, but I remember this event. It was a horrible event for me. She picked me up, and we were walking towards the tram, where the tram stop. Budapest has a fantastic um, um, subway and a tram and bus and trolley, you name it, they have it. You want to go someplace, you don't have to walk more than a block. Anyway, so we were going to the tram stop, and I could see my mother was following us, even though she said, the lady said, please don't follow us. She was following us, and she was crying, and I saw her. And then the tram came, and we got on the tram, and I could still see Mom, and as the tram was going away further and further away, Mom got smaller and smaller until she disappeared completely. And then I started crying like crazy. But that was okay, you see, because many times children, when you take them on some sort of transportation, they start crying. So it wasn't a big deal that I started crying, but I don't think you can imagine. I was crying like it was the end of the world. And I was never, ever away from my parents. At least one of them was always with us. And I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know who this woman was. I didn't know anything. And then when we arrived where this lady lived, it was really a shock because I came from luxury, we had everything. And this lady lived in, I would call it maybe a hut, one room. The whole thing was one room. It had no real floors. It had pet dirt floors. I don't know if you ever see anything like that, but I never seen one before or after. And there was no water. There were no toilets. There was electricity. That was it. But we went to the um, to get the water outside, and we had to roll down a pail and fill it up with water, and then pull it up and take it into the house. And the toilet was outside, an outhouse, and I was very little. And of course, you know how the outhouse has like a nice, fairly big hall on which you sit. And I had nightmares. Oh my God, what if I fall into all that muck? Oh my God, I couldn't sleep. But of course, I never fell in there. And things were going on okay, except this was still fairly close to Budapest, and the air raids were going on. And my father was hidden by his friend from university, who later became a colonel in the regular Hungarian army. He was not a Nazi. He was, as a matter of fact, what we would call a righteous Christian. He hid my father all through the whole Holocaust. He hid my father at the risk of his life, and he found a place for my mother to hide. And however, my mother's certificate or papers did not include two children, and so she couldn't have us there anyway. But anyway, this colonel, he could put on his uniform, and they could even take an official car, and he would get food, which was very, very scarce. He would get food from the black market and brought it to us every week. Now, one day, the shack was hit by a bomb, and we had no roof above our heads. And so the lady, Mrs. Konus, got word to my mother that she can't keep us there anymore because we have no roof over our heads. And so she would have to take us back. So my parents sent the colonel, whose name was Mr. Slaney, and Mr. Slaney came to get us. And even though Mrs. Konus saw Mr. Slaney bring food to us every week, she said, "I am sorry, but I promise to the parents of these children that I will never, ever give them to anybody except to them." Now, how is that for a righteous Christian? And so she came with us. Mr. Slaney carried my sister, but I was just trotting along, a little 4-year-old. And when we were passing one of the main streets of this little, I would call it a village, it was a very poor area. All of a sudden, the Hungarian Nazis, the Nyilas, by the way, Nyilas, that was the name that they gave them because their insignia was two arrows crossed. So in Hungarian, it was Nyilas arrow cross. So all of a sudden, an arrow cross guy came around the corner and yelled at everybody that we should not go on the street, only on the sidewalk. And so everybody went on the sidewalk, and I'm standing on the corner on the sidewalk also. And all of a sudden, I see these Hungarian Nazis, the Nyilas, herding just like cattle, men, women, and children, all ages, and were whipping them with actual whips and hitting them with the butts of their rifle. And uh, the people on the sidewalk, you know what they did? They were throwing stones at them, little stones and pebbles and everything that they had that they could throw, and were yelling, Buddha Shido, which means stinking Jew, and all sorts of epithets, ugly epithets against Jews. And I am thinking, oh my God, so this is what it means to be a Jew. This is why my parents told me never, ever mention my name to anybody, and never even let the word Jew pass my lips. It was like a revelation. I as a 4-year-old, to me, it didn't mean anything before Jew, not Jew, none of these things. But then it was like a lightning passed in through my head. And so this I remembered for the rest of my life, and I had nightmares about this. It was one of the worst things to see. And when we got to mom, uh, dad, of course, couldn't come with us. He came to see us, but he risked his life going on the street, even though he had false papers. But you know what they did to men who they supposed were Jews? Even if the papers were good, but if they had an inkling that this was a Jew, they simply made them drop their pants, and if they were circumcised, they were taken away, because the ordinary people were not circumcised, only the Jews. So after arriving every day, my mother with Mr. Slani took us trying to find a home for children where they would take us in. As I said, mom couldn't keep us. And every single home was full. The Jewish homes, there were actually homes for Jewish children that were established by the Jewish community. And there were children in there whose parents were deported. And I mean, the mother was deported, the father was in slave labor. So who is going to take care of them? They put them into Jewish homes. But there were also non-Jewish homes, because the bombs didn't know who was a Jew and who wasn't. And there were children whose parents were dead because of the bombings. So all of these homes were chock full of children. They couldn't make room for us, for my sister and myself. And so it looked like hopeless. And as a matter of fact, as I said, the bombs didn't know who was a Jew and who wasn't. And one day, coming back from one of these children's homes, we were on a tram, and the sirens went off. Even now, I can't stand sirens, because it reminds me of the world that I lived through. And so mom took us off from the tram, and we ran into a house, but we only stayed in the lobby and did not go down to the shelter, because this was a place near where we used to live. And mom was worried that if we go down to the shelter, somebody might recognize us. And Now the bombs started falling, and the noise was incredible, absolutely incredible. I don't know. Well, if you had been a soldier, you probably had encountered something like that. But I tell you that afterwards, for some time, I couldn't hear. My ears were just clogged from the noise, and uh, there was such noise. It was incredible, and people screaming, yelling, and houses were on fire. And finally, when it was over, when we looked out, the tram that we got off of was on its side, and it was completely burned out black. And whoever thought that they were better off in it, they were all burnt black inside. Now, finally, they did get a place for us. Now, Budapest is a beautiful city, and the Danube is a mighty river in the middle. And of course, there are bridges that connect the two sides of the city. And Buda is the hilly side, and Pest is a flat side. More Jews lived on the Pest side than on the Buddha side. But anyway, they found this place for us, and it was a nice big house. It used to be the home of the mayor of the city, maybe as big as some of the houses here in Connecticut. But you know what? It was built maybe for 6 people, 7 people, plus some servants. We were 100 children in that place, 100 children. But you know what? It was okay. But every single day, either the SS or the Hungarian Arrow Cross came to look for Jewish children. And nobody knew that my sister and I were Jews. Nobody, not even the people who were taking care of the children. And they thought we were Aryan, okay? Because we looked Aryan. That's what they said. Of course, we were 100% Jews, but that was the perception. And every time somebody came, either SS or Arrow Cross, they showed them our papers, which were authentic because they were printed in the city hall. And they pushed us up front. Look at the children. This is the kind of children we have here, only Aryans. So this worked most of the time. And then one time, a pair of really, really vicious Hungarian Nazis, Aerocross guys, came. And when they did this trick with us, with my sister and myself, they said, we want everybody's papers, not just this two. Well, you must have chilled the blood in their veins, those who understood what was going on, because that meant that they weren't safe anymore. And at this point, my little sister was about 2 years old, and or just turned 2. It must have been December, and my sister was born December 9th. And by the way, her name was Susanna. Susanna just started talking, and she ran over to one of these Hungarian Nazis and pulled on his pants and said, "Hey, Mr. Soldier, can I try on your hat?" And the soldier melted, picked up my sister, threw her in the air, and turned to his companion and said, "Can anyone but an Aryan child be as cute as this one?" And they left. And this is the story I like to tell, because this is how my 2-year-old sister saved 100 Jewish children. So that was a good thing among a lot of bad things. And then the house-to-house fighting for the city of Budapest went on. And of course, the Germans, when they were retreating, they blew up all the bridges, so there was no way to get across from one part of the city to the other. And at this point, the Germans decided to bring all their war equipment up to the roof of the house. The house had a flat roof, and so they were staying on the roof, and the Russians were already at the end of the garden, and they were shooting at one another, and we were inside the house. And what the adults did, of course, they pushed the high furniture against the windows that were looking out to the garden, so that the bullets, if they came that way, had to go through the window, the furniture, and then we were on the floor under mattresses. And we were so scared, you can't even imagine. First of all, it was terribly noisy with all the bullets coming and going, and other war equipment that they were using. And this is the only thing my sister remembered. Susanna was very young, so her memory was limited, but she remembered how scared we were, how we were really shaking like leaves in the wind because we were so afraid. But then the house caught fire, and we were inside, and the Germans, of course, came down from the roof, and they were crazed with hunger. And in the meantime, the house is gone, and we are inside. And they were demanding food. And who had food? I mean, in a city under siege, a peasant would be crazy to bring in any food, and no stores were open in a city like that. So nobody had food. We didn't either. And they said nobody leaves until they eat because they are hungry. So one of the adults was a very smart lady, and she was looking all over, and she found a small quantity of flour. And she told these uh, Germans that if they let the children go, then uh, she will make them pancakes. And so they let us go. Now, that was luck. But on the other hand, this happened to have been the coldest winter ever in Budapest. And all the sidewalks and the streets, everything was full of ice. But it was a silver lining in a way, because had it been warmer, there would have been such epidemic that half the city would have died, because nobody took care of the dead bodies. They were just frozen into the ground and frozen into the sidewalk, and body parts and bodies. And it was a horrendous sight. And they were carrying my sister because she she was so little, but I had to walk, and I was slipping and sliding until I fell over the dead body of a woman. And I, as I fell over her, I saw her blue eyes open, and she was incredibly cold. And I was so scared, I couldn't even make a sound, and I couldn't get up. And then somehow somebody got me off of her. But even into my adulthood, I had terrible nightmares about being on top of this dead body. And by the way, I was a little more than 4 years old now, and it somehow triggered an understanding in me, because I've been told about, oh well, don't do this because you can die. But when you're 4 years old, what does it mean to die? It doesn't mean anything. It's just another word. But at that point, I just thought, aha, this is what it means to die. This cold, frozen body is a dead body. So we were walking, but nobody took in 100 children, and they divided us up into groups of 10. And we slept in some abandoned barn that night. And that was okay because, in the barn they have hay, and if you cover yourself with hay, you're pretty warm. Well, warmer than out on the street. And then the next morning, it was a horrible snowstorm, but we started our way towards um, some some place which um, was the home of the Reverend Stelo. Now, the Reverend Stelo has a tree at Yad Vashem. He was an incredibly righteous man. He saved close to 1,000 Jewish boys. And it was much, much more difficult to save boys than girls because, as I told you, none of the Hungarian population was circumcised. But this pastor, he was just a righteous, wonderful man. So in the snow, and in this uh, storm, we were walking towards his house. And when, well, there was something happened in between, but I will only tell you maybe later because it would lengthen the story very much. And it's something that I have never cleared up in my whole life and is still bothering me. But anyway, I thought at the time that those little snowflakes, they are beautiful, like lace, beautiful snowflakes. And I don't know where the lady who was taking us, 10 of us, got a sled, and we took time on the sled, each one of us a few minutes. And finally, we got to the Reverend Stelo. And the Reverend Stelo said that you can sleep here on the floor one night, but tomorrow morning after the storm, you have to go because all I have here are boys and I have no room for anybody else. But he gave us dinner. Dinner was a few stalks of asparagus from a can, which tasted so horrible that to this day I can't stand asparagus. And so we slept there, and the next morning we were on our way. And this is when the worst time happened to us because we had no place to go. And we lived on the street, and there was no food, and we had nothing to eat. And you may be surprised, but you can eat snow. If it's clean snow, that's what we were eating, snow. And we washed in the snow so we didn't have lice. And sometimes we found a house which was bombed out and nobody lived there, but there was a small piece of it where there was at least roof, so we could stay there. And sometimes we got some debris and made a fire so we shouldn't be that cold. But I tell you, living on the street in the coldest winter was not fun. It wasn't fun at all. And starving. I mean, I know many people starve on Yom Kippur, but you do that for one day and you do that out of your conviction. We haven't seen any food. I don't know how long. And I don't know because the uh, conception of time of a little child is not the same as an adult. So I don't know how long we lived on the street. But I know that we ended up in another children's home. And this, I believe, happened to have been a Catholic home. Uh, and and it was filthy, absolutely filthy. I have never seen such filth. And the kids who were there, they all had lice, hair lice, head lice, body lice, any kind of lice you can think of, because there are many different kinds of lice. And we got the lice, which we didn't have until we got there. And it was just a horrendous situation. No food. I mean, we no longer ate snow, but the food that we got was nothing. I mean, every Sunday we had a service. This is how I think it was uh, a Catholic home. Every Sunday morning we had a service. And after the service, in a little bowl, we got like 4 or 5 white cherries. Oh my God, you don't know what that meant. It was like manna from heaven. White cherries. Even now, when I see them in the market, I buy the white cherries. They tasted like, oh, something out of this world. And then my sister got very high fever and she got very sick and they isolated her. And I was absolutely frightened. What is going to happen? Now I'm going to be, if she disappears, I'm going to be all alone in the world, just like mom and dad I haven't seen for months. I, I'm going to be alone. And I went to look in where she was. I couldn't really go in, but I would open the door a little and see that Susanna was still there. And I did this, I don't know, maybe every hour, once every hour, but uh, frequently. But I didn't have to do it very long because I got the same sickness and I was put in the room with her. Only I got a bonus disease. I got, to this day, I don't know the name of that disease that I got. I had um, pussy sores all over my body. That was so painful that I, I couldn't take it. It was horrible. Every part of my body was full of this pussy thing. And um, I didn't know what disease we had either. Only maybe 3 months ago, I brought this up to a friend of mine who happens to be a cardiologist, a Jewish boy, a cardiologist, and boy, he's 80 or 82, in Frankfurt, Germany. And I said, well, Peter, what is this in English? Because I knew the Hungarian name. And, and he said to me, don't you know, silly, you too had tuberculosis. And that's why you were so sick. And I don't know how long it took, but you know, um, my parents couldn't come across the Danube because there were no bridges. As I said, the Germans blew them up. And when the Russians declared victory, they built a temporary bridge. And people were standing on line to get onto the first bridge. And my mother was one of the first ones with Mr. Slaney. My father um, wasn't there because they were taking primarily Jewish men. The Russians were taking them to Siberia. Some of them didn't get back for 10 years. And so dad didn't come, but my mother and Mr. Slaney went to the Red Cross and my mother said, well, I have somewhere here a pair of daughters either by the name of Agnes and Susanna Kovacs or Agnes and Susanna Katz. And they said to her, we know that they got out of the burning home, but we don't know where they are now. So you have to go to all the children's homes and perhaps even private homes to try to find them. And you know what? I was so stupid. I guess all my life, I never asked my mother how she found us. I don't know how they found us. And then when they did find us, it was way after liberation. And I don't know when we were liberated because, I was a little kid and to me, liberation or not liberation, it didn't mean a whole lot. And we weren't much better off after liberation, food-wise and any otherwise. So didn't make much difference to me. But then Mom found us, and we looked like, when they show you the skeletons in Auschwitz and all the other camps, just skin and bones. And when we got to the bridgehead, it was guarded by two Russian soldiers. And I have to tell you that the Russian soldiers were absolute brutes. They raped every woman they laid eye on, and they took everybody's watch. Some of them had watches up to here, and when they heard that it was no longer ticking, they just threw it away because they didn't realize they have to wind it. And so they were absolute brutes, but they saw these two emaciated kids, and they felt so sorry for us. They gave each one of us a loaf of bread. Oh my God, you don't know what that meant to us. A whole loaf of bread. We didn't even see bread for months. It was like, oh, it was amazing. So I just ate a little because that's the way I was. My sister ate the whole loaf of bread all at once. She got even sicker because her stomach wasn't used to having so much food. And Mom took us back home, and we couldn't really go back to our old place because whoever lived there must have been a pig, because we had two bathrooms, but they went to the bathroom in every room, and the whole house was disgusting. Now, some people who lived in my grandparents' home must have been a little better, but that house was full of bed bugs. So what had to be done, they had an exterminator come, and he just sprayed some gas in there to kill the bed bugs, and um, sealed the house. So we couldn't go in. I think it was 2 days. I don't remember. And then he opened it and just swept out the dead bugs. And the reason I tell you this is because that scene somehow gave in my mind, gave me in my mind a picture when I heard adults who returned from Auschwitz telling the story of how people were gassed. And they thought, I don't listen, I'm only 5 years old, but I'm not going to know anything, right? But I listened and I heard. And so from then on, for me, this was the two things together. This is how they treated us, like we treat bed bugs. Gas us and then clear it out. So this is why I told you this was my mindset. And I still think of it that way. And by the way, from Hungary, from the countryside, they deported 400 about 450,000 men, women, and children within 6 weeks. And it was the largest deportation. They were waiting for 1 million Hungarian Jews in Auschwitz. Most of the Jews went to Auschwitz from Hungary. And they built an extension of the railroad closer to the gas chamber so that they could have a faster extermination. And my great grandmother, who was 90, as I told you before, she was, of course, one of them who was exterminated there, along with, I don't know, 8 or 9 of her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. And I also want to tell you, before I'm going to stop talking, the different ways that people were murdered. It wasn't just going to Auschwitz, although that was pretty terrible, very terrible. And if it weren't for my parents' smartness and money, I would have been smoke also, because I was like between 4 and 5 years old, and nobody survived who was that age, because they all went to the gas chambers unless they were twins, and that's a separate story. Now, as I told you, my father's family was very wealthy. So my father's mother was a very smart woman, and she figured, we have all this money, we're going to save ourselves. So she paid up somebody in a what would you call it? A home for people who recuperating, and so they were there. My grandmother on my father's side, two of my aunts on my father's side, and two of my cousins. My grandfather died there of some disease, and then when they started the ghettoization of the Budapest Jews, my mother got absolutely crazed because her mother was taken to the ghetto. And, it was a ghetto like the Warsaw Ghetto, nobody in, nobody out. And she got word to my cat's grandmother, my father's mother, that she better get her mother out of the ghetto and pay for her to be where she is. And so my grandmother did it. So now my two grandmothers were in that place, and two of my aunts and two of my cousins. And my older cousin, who was 9 at the time, he was very bored, and he nagged his mother, my aunt, who was my father's younger sister, that he wants to go to my mother in Pest because he's so bored and he wants to go. And he nagged until my aunt decided to take him, and there were still bridges to go to the Pest side. And then the bridges were blown up and they couldn't get back. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is that many people in the ghetto survived. Many died or were murdered, but many survived. And somebody on the near this home, the rehab home, must have told this Nazi priest, believe it or not, there was a rabid Nazi priest. And when he heard this, he went to this home and robbed my family of everything valuable, and then marched them down to the garden and shot them all, including my 2-year-old cousin Eva. And then he poured gasoline over them and burned them. So after everything was over, my father, who survived, and one of my uncles who survived went with the dental charts to identify who is ours. Now, my aunt and cousin who went to my mother survived. My grandmother, who was taken to the ghetto and was moved in with my other grandmother, could have survived maybe in the ghetto, but no, she didn't survive in this place where the rest of the family was. And so that's my story, and I will be happy to take questions. Anybody?
Oh, Agnes. Oh, my heavens. Your memory at such a young age to be able to recount this story in itself is incredible. Obviously, the impact it had was indelible. I will, if people have questions, if you will unmute yourself, raise your hand. I'll make sure that you're called on. Anybody, or are you as stunned as I am? Sheila.
I'm sorry, I don't remember. Is your sister Suzanne still alive, Agnes?
My sister Susanna lived in Rockland County and in Florida. And on her way to her place in Florida, she was driving, and we don't really know how it happened, but she died in a car accident 9 years ago. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, she was the only
I'm
one,
sorry.
my only sister.
Mhm.
I know.
And I want to
ahead.
tell you that she hardly remembered anything except that one thing under the mattresses. But according to my observation, the younger you were, the more it affected you, even though you didn't know what was going on. My sister was sick all through her life, headaches, you name it, and very intelligent, spoke several languages, and was really a wonderful person, but the health just wasn't with her.
I know that Lee had his hand raised. Erica, I think you did. So, Lee, go ahead.
Agnes, thank you for a very powerful and informative story. It was really heart-touching. I have some information for you which may be of use to you. My great uncle was a person who was in the Holocaust with his younger daughter who was 15 or 13 at the time. They were fleeing the Germans and they got separated. But wherever my uncle went, he kept asking people, have you seen a 13-year-old girl by herself? And he kept doing this over and over again until one day a person said, yes, I know of a young girl, 13-year-old, who is in this house with other sick people, but she's dying of typhoid. So he ran into the house and he saw her and he saved her life. Now it's possible your mother may have done the same thing. Wherever she went, she persistently asked, have you seen two little children, until she came across you.
Maybe.
Thank you, Lee. Erica, good point, Lee. Erica?
Can you hear
She
me?
did.
Yes.
Yeah, now I do.
Yeah, thank you, Agnes. Thank you so much for sharing. It's so painful to hear. You cannot imagine. What year were you able to leave Hungary, and when did you come to United States?
Well, we had a double whammy in Hungary. We were waiting for people to return from Auschwitz. Some returned and immediately went west again. And by the time we could leave, it became communist. Now, under communism, as you know from your mother, under communism, capitalists were considered enemies of the people. And that's a separate story what a horrible time we had there, including how they actually deported some people to horrible places, and um, they took my father into prison and they tortured him, and it's a long story. And because I was designated as a capitalist descendant and an enemy of the people, 8 grades of education was compulsory. But then, even though I was #1 student in my class, none of the high schools would take me. And I was fortunate that Budapest was the only city around that area in Eastern and Central Europe that had a Jewish high school. And the Jewish high school was full of people like me, and the teachers were wonderful people who were previous to the communist regime, were professors at university, but they weren't trusted, so they couldn't teach at the university, and they taught at the Jewish school. Now, when the Hungarian Revolution came, and I heard that some people are getting through the border, which was impossible before, I told my sister, we're gonna go. And my parents could not come because in 1948, I had a brother born, and he happened to be sick at that time when we could have gone through the border. And I said to my parents, I am sorry, I am going to leave, and I'm taking Susanna with me. And we had that took us down to, or up, I don't know, to Sopron, which is a city near Austria, but near is not that near because it's several miles that you have to walk. And we tried 3 times before we got across, and it's a long story what happened in Vienna, etc. So we were staying in Vienna, and what I did was to make a living, or whatever you want to call it. I didn't want to sell my body, so I went on the black market, changing money, and that's how I supported us. And then when I heard that they were going to again hermetically close the border like before, I got very scared that I never see my brother and my parents again. And so I somehow arranged for them to come to Vienna. And then my brother was still sick, and he was put into Kinderspital, the children's hospital in Vienna. And there he got meningitis, which had after effects for the rest of his life, but he died at the age of 21 because of that. And we came here February 23, 1957. We arrived in Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, and we had lots of relatives here. I mean, my grandmother's sister lived in Brooklyn. My grandmother's aunt lived in California. My mother's brother lived in Bronx, and my father's brother in California. So we got here because we had so many relatives here. In fact, those are the families that still have a number of people. Ours, we are practically nothing.
So Agnes, fast forward, because I asked you this question when I met you on the phone, and I think that our folks will be interested in if you can just stay for a little bit longer. I think you'll find it interesting as to how and why Agnes got to Connecticut. Will you tell the story that you told me about your daughter? right?
My daughter? No,
In
I got to,
school. The school story you told
oh,
me.
the school story. Well, we lived in Riverdale, New York. That's the Bronx, really, but you know, people call it Riverdale. I call it Bronx. And in a very, very nice doorman and everything, nice luxury place. And the school was across the street. And my son was in the elementary school. And I always brought him home for lunch because it was across the street. And across the street from that was the middle school, or there it was called junior high school. And one of the other Jewish women who lived in the building, she also brought her daughter home for lunch from the junior high. And when we were leaving the building and going to take our kids to the school, she gives her daughter $5. Now, this is 1971. $5 for a kid was a lot of money. And I said, why are you doing that? You fed her already. And she said, I'm giving her the money because they are bringing students from Harlem, and they have knives, and they hold up the kids, and if they don't have money, they cut them. Well, I didn't have to hear more. I didn't want to bring up my children in that kind of an atmosphere. And besides, my husband's company moved to Greenwich, Connecticut. So we built the house in Weston and we moved here.
So your whole life has been a journey of survival.
Yes.
Total
Yes.
of survival. I don't know. Jackie, do you have a question? Okay. I can't even respond to your story except to say, happy isn't the word, but I am happy. I'm honored on behalf of Congregation Rodeph Sholom that you shared your story, because all of the people who heard your story, you can be sure, will share your story. And so your story will not end, for sure. Edith, I owe you a hug, but you'll have to take it virtually for introducing me to Agnes. You were so right. She's amazing. She's wonderful. We've spoken a few times and I'm very grateful. This has been a morning. I've been watching your faces and nobody has moved and we've gone past time. You should know that Rodeph Sholom is making a contribution to the Holocaust child survivors of Connecticut in Agnes' honor. Debbie is taking care of that. Debbie is our president. Debbie, you should unmute and say hello so Agnes connects with a face.
Hello. The one thing that just I keep thinking about over and over again is how your 2-year-old sister saved 100 children. And that just keeps, and she probably never remembers it. And I'm sure you reminded her many times. And that's I mean, there were so many things but I just keep thinking about that. Amazing.
By the way, my daughter was a member of Rodeph Sholom for a while.
Oh, really?
Yes, Vivian Rockmacher.
Oh, yes, but she moved to Florida, right? Didn't she?
Right.
Yes, yes. Oh, very nice. Very
the
nice.
world gets smaller and smaller. Edith, I see you've unmuted, so it must mean you have something to say.
Well, first of all, I want to thank Agnes. I'm also a survivor, but my story does not compare anywhere to hers. I also want to mention that Eric Cohen was also go-between in getting, I want to thank her in getting Agnes to come to speak with us. And I want to thank Agnes very much for telling us such an intimate story.
Thank you, Edith. Erica, you must have been behind the scenes without telling me. You're muted. You're muted. Oh, Erica, you're talking, but we're not hearing you.
I interviewed Erica's mother for the Shoah Foundation.
For the
Ah.
Spielberg, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my mother's picture. And we have the video.
remember your mother and your father.
And it's my
Well,
mother.
ladies and
Thank you,
gentlemen,
Agnes.
You're welcome.
this has been a morning to never be forgotten, which is appropriate.
I hope
Uh,
to see you tomorrow at Yom HaShoah, Agnes.
I,
You
Agnes,
got
amazing.
my email?
No, but I hope to be on your email. No, I didn't.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Edith,
Thanks for organizing.
Can I
Thank you
also,
very much, Agnes. Thank you.
You're welcome, Edith.
don't go
Thank
off
you.
yet because I have something else to tell you. Edith,
can I just say, remind everybody that Agnes is still out there doing good works for the survivors. And she's been very helpful for me too, for me too. And she's partnering with Jewish Family Services, and between the two organizations, they are taking care of the survivor Jewish community, and also doing good deeds for the general community. Thank you, Agnes.
You're
thank
welcome.
you for sharing that. Agnes, that's obvious. I'm glad that Edith said it, but you are one incredible person. And the way you told your story, you are an amazing speaker. And I can't thank you enough on behalf of Congregation Rodeph Sholom. I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I just got an email while Agnes was speaking. I have a surprise for next week for Yom Ha'atzmaut, and you won't want to miss it. But I can tell you, it will be straight from Israel. So put it on your calendar. That will be from Israel, and I will be in Virginia, but you will never know where I am. We'll have our program. So once again, thank
Also,
you. Go ahead,
I
Deb.
want to also, since we have everybody on here, Sunday at 5 o'clock, we have a very special program with Rabbi Doberson, much lighter, about Jewish influence on sitcoms. So I just want to remind you of that since we're all on.
And you must remember him because he did the program on his journey to Latvia, another very dynamic speaker, but he promises that this time we'll laugh. And I think we all could use a laugh. So Agnes, if you're looking for a laugh, you might enjoy him also. Same Zoom link.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So light your candles. And there's my candle. And stay safe, everybody. And again, Agnes, thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Thank
You're
you,
welcome.
Carol. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Another amazing
Thank you very
program.
much.
Fabulous. Thank you, everybody.
These
Carol and
Zoom
Aggie.
group was
Amazing.
Amazing.
I gotta
It's
go.
because of you we do these programs, so thank you.